This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and today we're going to rehab an old talking book player from 1967. This is the model AE4 and was the last tube type model. The one after it was the solid state plastic cased AE5. So yeah, this is the end of an era here, and in my opinion these old tube type talking book players are the best kind. There was an earlier solid state model, which I have, the model E1, that was in a wooden case, smaller than this one, from about 66, somewhere around there. They didn't make many of them because they were pretty expensive to make, so they just kept on making the tube type ones. This one was given to me by an elderly lady. She's probably in her mid to late 70s now. And she started losing her sight in the mid-60s and eventually went totally blind and raised a couple of kids by herself after her, well, let's just say her not-so-nice husband couldn't handle it and left. So, you know, when you hear people complaining about their petty problems with kids and what have you, you can always look and find somebody worse off. You know, here this lady was without the kid's father in the home and totally blind and going back to school and going through rehabilitation and raising two kids on her own. So it's something to think about. Now, the first thing we need to do is fix this lovely plug splice. I'm going to put a standard power plug on the end of this, and other than that I think all this is going to need is the standard mechanical overhaul, new motor mounting grommets, possibly a new idler wheel, cleaning and lubrication, etc. The amplifier, I'm probably not going to do much to it because the amps in these machines are very reliable. In fact, I've never even had to replace a filter capacitor in one of them. And I'm not going to replace the one in this one unless it goes bad down the road. I know some of the change all the caps freaks are probably going crazy over that statement, but when you have quality parts and they hold up, then what's the point in changing them? Okay, I've decided just to, here's the airplane coming over. I'm sure it'll be at Shango's house pretty soon. Hold on, let me pause this until the plane flies. Alright, as I was saying, I've decided just to go ahead and put a nice, fresh, new power cord on here. My plug I had was an old Bakelite plug that had a crack in it, so we'll just go ahead and change the plug. But before we do that, I'll tell a little story. I know some of you like to hear my stories. I haven't got into a rant mode or anything lately, and I'll try not to get into too big of a rant mode today, but talking about the lady's ex-husband, who was shall we say, not a nice person, in keeping this channel family friendly. When I was growing up, I knew an older couple who were an inspiration to me. He fought during World War II, and during that time he stepped on a landmine that resulted in the loss of both of his eyes and an arm, and some internal injuries that stayed with him until the day he died. Well, when he came back home from the war, he met this lady here in town, and they fell in love, and they got married, and they were married for 50, however many years, until the day he died. She overlooked the fact that he couldn't see and didn't have an arm. She married him for the right reasons. And I realized that even back then it was probably hard enough to find somebody that could overlook those things, but in today's world, as I've found out over the years, it's even much harder to find somebody to overlook those things. In fact, when I was younger, I've had plenty of people look down their nose at me because I couldn't drive or whatever, couldn't see as well as they could. And it seems like in today's world, if you're not Mr. Cool Dude that drives the right car or makes the right amount of bucks and knows the right people and is fun-loving and all that good stuff, they don't really want anything to do with you, and, you know, that's perfectly fine because frankly, I don't want anything to do with them either. And over the years, I've heard meet a good one in church. Well, I somewhat agree with that, but I can also tell you that just because somebody occupies a space in church every Sunday morning and Wednesday night and sings in the choir and listens to nothing but contemporary Christian music, that doesn't mean they're going to be the nicest person in the world. In fact, some of the biggest snits that I've run up on is we're sitting in church every Sunday. But now I'm to the age where I'm, shall we say, set in my ways. I'm used to doing things on my own terms. And I'm not really looking to find anybody, and that just suits me fine. So when I hear these people complaining, oh, I don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, I want to tell them, well, you might better count your blessings. You may not realize how lucky you have it. So with that said, let's open this thing up. We got to take out all these screws, these two screws here that hold the lid support, and the two screws under the bottom. Yeah, this thing's built like a tank. And yeah, and the smudge you see in the lower left-hand corner, that's the redneck camera repair piece of tape I've got holding the protective shutter down. It's gotten so it won't go down on its own anymore. So yeah, a new camera is in the very near future. And as far as how I treat people, you know, I try to treat people how I want to be treated. I'm not gonna look down my nose at somebody because their circumstances in life happen to be different than mine. That's no way to act. And when you got people sitting in church that's doing that, that's certainly no way to act, and it's certainly not promoting a positive Christian witness, and it's certainly not going to entice people to, especially non-believers, it's not going to entice them to want to come to church and become a Christian. I can tell you that. I've talked to too many people over the years. Alright, let's open it up and see what... Okay, here we are open, and I'll say one more thing about people's actions, whether it be church folks or whomever. I just have to remind myself, and I've given this advice to others, that no matter how people around us act, when I leave this world, I'm not going to have to answer for what they did. I'm going to have to only answer for what I did in life, so that's just the way that goes. Alright, here's the amplifier. As you can see, it's well made, has a power transformer, it's a 3-tube amp, 6x4 rectifier, 12AX7 driver tube, and a 6CM6 for the output tube, which is a bit of a weird output tube. I don't know why they went with that. That was mainly used as a vertical output tube in some black and white TVs. This amplifier design really didn't change much over the years. It first appeared in about 1956 and was used up until about 68 when they discontinued the tube models. This one here, as you can see, uses some Japanese electrolytic capacitors, and we got this thing here. But I've never seen one of these go bad. This filter capacitor is very reliable. And we have our 4-pole motor, and I can tell the grommets are about shot. Okay, new power cord is in place. Yeah, another nice thing about these is they have tube retainer clips, which is a very good idea, and I wish more companies besides the Japanese had thought of that. These machines traveled a good bit through the mail, whether it be delivering the machine to the recipient or the recipient sending it back for repair, or if they no longer desired service and returning the machine. But at any rate, these went through the mail a good bit, and they had to be made tough to survive the shipping abuse. And back then, during the era of these machines up until the present day, these were generally repaired by the telephone pioneers of America. If a library patron had a problem with a machine, they just simply contacted their talking book library, mailed it back, and the machine was either repaired or in many cases they just swapped the machine out. I know every time I've had a problem with a cassette player or the new digital talking book player, I just called them up and sent the old one back, and they sent me another one. Alright, let's turn it on and see where we are mechanically with this. This actually has two controls. This is off, on, and volume, and this is motor power and tone. And yeah, that's the sound of it being in neutral and the motor sagging and the shaft rubbing up against the motor, the idler tension spring. Here we are at 8 RPM and a flexible disc. It's probably going to slip and slide all over the place because this old mat is pretty well finished. Well, it would help if I put the cartridge. These use a static 83D plug-in cartridge assembly, which is very similar to what's used in the school record players, except these use a double diamond LP tip, whereas the school record players usually use one with a Sapphire LP tip and a Sapphire 78 tip on the other side. Now, let's see where we are. Yeah, we're slipping all over the place. Let me find a weight, something to hold this down.
Side 1, QST, August 1982. Copyright 1982 by the American Radio Relay League. Published by the American Radio Relay League, 225 Main Street, Newington, Connecticut, 06111. Narrated by Dick McDaniel, Paul Reinertsen, Bob Askey, Don Braun, David Hickson, and Bob Boots. This magazine contains 164 pages on 12 sides and was originally produced for the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, Library of Congress. You will not be contacted by the producer of this magazine to verify cancellation.
And we have very little torque here, so...
To cancel your subscription, or if you change your address, please notify...
And here's a 16 RPM record, and you can see this has a rather unique guide here. If you can't see at all or have very, very limited vision, you can just simply gently let the tone arm slide down off the guide onto the lead-in groove of the record. And that idler wheel has dents in it.
Caper of the Golden Bulls, a novel of suspense by William P. McGivern. Copyright 1966 by William P. McGivern. Recorded for the Library of Congress and the Talking Book Studios of American Foundation for the Blind, Incorporated, with the kind permission of the publishers, Dodd Mead and Company. Solely for the use of the blind. Read by Guy Sorrell. Listeners are requested to keep these talking book discs clean and in order. The Caper of the Golden Bulls, Chapter 1.
Now we'll play a 12-inch 33 RPM, so we'll just slide these back. We'll get the record off first. Okay.
The Men Who Robbed Brinks, as told by Specs O'Keefe, one of the ringleaders, to Bob Considine in cooperation with the FBI. Copyright 1961 by Random House, Incorporated. Recorded in 10 records for the Library of Congress in the studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, 1961. Intended solely for the use of the blind, with the kind permission of the publishers, Random House, Incorporated. Read by Milton Metz. A sketch of the author will be found at the end of the last recording. This is the inside story. He and his wife live in New York City. They have 3 sons and a daughter. This is the end of The Men Who Robbed Brinks, as told by Specs O'Keefe to Bob Considine in cooperation with the FBI. Recorded in the Talking Book Studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, Louisville, Kentucky, September 1961. Read by Milton Metz.
Alright, here we are with the turntable platter removed, and I'm already seeing something that I don't like. and it's a sign of somebody either not knowing what they're doing or being too lazy to solve the problem. This is the idler wheel tension spring. It should attach to this little post right here, but most likely what happened, the record player got to the point that the wheel wasn't gripping as good as it should have, so they just stretched it over and bolted it under here. But what we're going to have to do is take it off, and hopefully they hadn't stretched this enough where I have to replace the spring, and we're going to clean and lubricate everything, and probably going to have to replace the idler wheel. It uses the standard 1490-01, which is a common school record player idler wheel, so it shouldn't be a problem getting one. And of course these rubber mounts, they sagged and need to be replaced, so that won't be any problem either. Alright, here's something I dug out that I'd like to show you. This is my original borrower's handbook from 1999 from the Talking Book Library, where it talks about cassette players and record players and talking books and what you get from the service and how long you can keep the books and all that good stuff. And you see all this printed material here. And at the very bottom, the equipment may only be repaired at government authorized repair centers. And then if we go on down here, it says, do not attempt to repair or have repaired any equipment on loan to you. Return equipment needing repair to the Mississippi Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. And then it goes down to talk about what to do when your equipment messes up, and if you want another format besides a record, or if you want a record or a cassette player or both or whatever, contact them. But why do you think they emphasize not to have the equipment repaired yourself? Or should I say, why do you think they emphasize not to have the equipment repaired by an unauthorized facility or attempt to repair it yourself? It's just because of stuff like this right here. Instead of somebody actually fixing the problem, which would entail replacing this worn idler wheel, they stretched the spring over here and attached it to another position, and not only is it rubbing on the motor shaft, it's also placing extra pressure on the motor shaft here, which could in turn cause the bushings to wear out faster. So it's just a classic example. If you don't know how to fix the problem right, then don't fool with it at all. Pass it along to somebody who does. And with the wheel off, you can get a better idea of what's going on here. And play position, it pulls it back a little bit where it's not rubbing quite so hard against the motor shaft, but in neutral, it's rubbing against it big time. We've got a lot of crud down in here too. Now if we look at the wheel, we can see that it's kind of glazed up and has some dents in it. I might can put it in the drill and temporarily straighten it out, but this is going to need a new wheel and might need a new spring. Alright, I was able to bend the spring somewhat back into the proper shape, so maybe I can get by without replacing it. And now we need to take all this apart and clean it up. And we're going to take this spindle out, clean it and re-lubricate it with Phono Lube. I'm going to clean all this up and lubricate this step portion with Phono Lube, as well as these little sprocket teeth here with Phono Lube. Coat this with a little bit of Zoom spout oil. We'll take this clip off here, separate these two pieces, clean everything out real good with alcohol or contact cleaner. In this case, contact cleaner, because I'm about out of alcohol. Need to go to Walmart tomorrow. And coat this with a shaft with a small bit of Zoom spout oil. Then we'll take our motor out, take it apart, clean it out with contact cleaner and re-lubricate with Zoom spout, replace these supper coming back up. take these grommets out, replace them with some fresh new ones, put it all back together. I'll put our idler wheel in the drill and try to get it temporarily fixed while I order another one. I can get a new one for about $30. However, back when this record player was botched up like this, I suspect you could still run to the parts house and get a new one for less than $5. Because when I got this, the record that was on it was a copy of National Geographic from 1992, I believe. So that tells me this thing hasn't been used since then, probably. And in 92, I could still run down to the parts house and buy the correct idler wheel for this thing for little or nothing. Okay, we have this portion cleaned up and the spring placed in the correct position. As you can see, it's nowhere close to the motor shaft now. And it shifts smoothly just like it's supposed to. So now all we have to do is take our motor apart and lubricate it and replace these grommets, and we'll be back in business. And before we continue, one thing I like about these, or one of the many things I like about these older machines over the newer ones, is this one actually has a rubber turntable pad that just slips over the platter. Now in the center it had a piece of foam rubber to keep the flexible disc from slipping. The later machines, starting with the plastic cased era, had those horrible foam rubber mats that were glued to the platter, and I can tell you that even back in the 80s when they were relatively new, those mats were starting to dry rot and little pieces would flake off and stick to your record, and getting those mats off of the turntable platter where they're glued on is a royal pain in the butt. This mat here, it's starting to rot a little bit, but it's still usable, so I think I'm going to clean it up the best I can and just put a little piece of foam rubber here in the center to keep the flexible disc from slipping, and hopefully we'll be good to go. Now this particular machine was manufactured by Warwick Electronics, which was a private label electronics manufacturer that I believe was partially owned by Sears, and they made lots of TVs and other electronics for Sears. Now other companies that built these machines was during this time period was Westinghouse and Waters Conley. They all look the same on the inside and out because all the manufacturers were building them to government standards, so they were all the same. In later years they were built by some of the last solid state ones some of the earlier solid state ones from the 70s were made by Warwick and Waters Conley, and then by the mid-70s they were made by a company called Interstate Industries. That was the company that built a lot of cheap record players and little stereos under the Concert Hall and Emerson brand names during the 70s and 80s. And then the last talking book record players and most of the cassette players were built by Telex Communications. Some of the early cassette talking book players were made by GE. So there you go. Pretty much they were all made by whoever the government could hire to build them the most economically. Okay, we got the center spindle lubricated and it turns smoothly now. And we need to replace these, which we have some brand new ones here. Just simply pop these out and slide the old ones in. So you can tell this one's hard. It's starting to, I can feel it cracking, and see how it just crumbles apart there. Here's the motor. It's a nice General Industries 4-pole motor. Date coded the 26th week of 1967. So yeah, this is truly the tail end of the tube-type talking book machine era. But yeah, when they're all discolored and cracked and deformed, they're bad, and it's time to replace them. Another common problem, they may not get all crackly and hard and dry rotted, but they'll lose their shape and cause the motor to sag and be wobbly. and it shouldn't be that wobbly. And here's our new ones. They're nice and spongy and rubbery. I get these from Antique Electronics Supply. You can also get them from the Voice of Music website. Okay, that's done, and now it's time to clean the motor up and take it apart. Fortunately, there's no side-to-side play in the motor shaft, which is a good thing, because if there was, that would indicate bearing wear, and I've actually saw that happen one time on one of these. I ended up junking out the machine. What I should have done was just put a standard 3 or 4 speed motor in it and turned it into a regular phonograph. Here we are apart, and to my surprise there's still some oil down in there, but we're going to clean it out with some alcohol and a Q-tip. Do the same with the motor shaft here, and then we'll re-lubricate everything with fresh oil, and then we'll put it back together. And if you look down in there, you can see the felt wicking. We're going to soak that really heavily in zoom spout oil, as well as put a couple of drops here on the bearing itself, and we'll do the same thing to the bottom bushing or bearing, whatever you choose to call it. And mixed in with that old oil, you can see the crud that was there with it, the black stuff on the Q-tip, and that's not as bad as I've seen some of them. Okay, I got the motor cleaned up, lubricated, and put back together, but I had a bit of an oops moment. I reassembled everything wrong, and now these won't line up with the holes here and have sufficient length for the wire for everything to go together, so I'm going to have to take it apart and spin this around and get it in here right so we can put it all back together properly. Alright, the motor's back in and running quietly and as it should, all cleaned up. Now all we need to do is see about the idler wheel, and hopefully this thing will be just about wrapped up. Okay, we're getting there. I'm going to have to replace the idler wheel to get rid of that dent, but I sanded enough off of the old one to get the glazy surface off, and it's now got good grip with the spring in the correct place, I might add. And you're probably wondering, why didn't the recipient of this machine just send it back to the library for repair instead of having somebody do the sloppy repair work that they performed on it? Well, I think I know the answer to that, because I remember several years ago, me and the lady that owned this, or not officially owned it, but had use of it, told me that she really liked this old wooden talking book player from the 60s, and that she knew she could have got a newer plastic one, but she didn't really care for the newer plastic ones, so she probably figured if she sent this old one back in for repair, they wouldn't do nothing but send it to the crusher and send her a newer model. So rather than do that, she just had it fixed herself. So like I said, we're going to have to replace the idler wheel, but it will work for now, and I'm going to look into the amplifier. It seems to be a tad weak. I just want to make sure there's nothing going on there that shouldn't be going on. Here's a 12-inch record of the Reader's Digest from '72. This is an 8 1/3 RPM record, and this particular magazine takes up 2 records, with each side of the record playing roughly 2 hours, give or take a few minutes. So you're talking about 8 hours worth of listening for 4 records. Or excuse me, 8 hours worth of listening on 4 sides, 2 records. Yeah, these slow records don't get in any hurry about starting. Seems like they run forever before they start.
Slide 4, Reader's Digest, August 1972. Warning, X-rays may be dangerous to your health.
Yeah, don't sit too close to the color TV.
Democracy. Humor in uniform. Should you choose early retirement?
Alright, checking our output tube control grid voltage in respect to cathode, I get negative 12 volts, so that tells me this capacitor is perfectly fine. It's a sprayed cap. There's no need to change it. Yeah, I was looking at the tubes, and what's strange is all 3 of them are Silvertone branded, which was Sears' house brand. with 274 EIA codes on them, so that means they were made by RCA. And remember me saying that this machine was made by Warwick and there was some Sears ownership there, so that probably explains the Silvertone branded tubes. Now the date codes, two of them are date coded the 48th week of 67, the other one is date coded the 52nd week of 67, so this machine was probably made in early 68, so that would definitely put it at the end of the line for the tube era. Alright, testing the tubes. This 6CM6 shows a short. So yeah, that's an automatic no-go. And it's also weak, so yeah, it's in the low end of the good, but since it shows a short, we need to get rid of that. Well, I would have sworn I had a new 6CM6 or two, but I just looked through my tube stash and can't find one of them. In fact, my tube stash is getting pretty pathetic. Over the past 30 years, I've pretty much used all the common ones, and what's left is stuff I'll probably never use. You know, the old saying, I've got every tube except the one I need. So I'll just have to get on the internet and order one. It makes me wonder why in the devil did they use a 6CM6? Why couldn't they have used something like a common 6BQ5 or something like that? Well, I know why they probably didn't, because that was a popular, more expensive tube. They probably got a good deal on 6CM6s because that's a less popular, less common tube, so that's what they went with. Okay, I'm going to end this here. There's pretty much no need, and I don't really want to drag this out. I've got the tube on order, and I'm going to replace the idler wheel, and I think you can visualize the results whenever I get those items in. In fact, it works pretty good like it is. So let's give it a shot here, and I'm probably going to replace the needle. Now, the only thing I did to the chassis was I replaced the cathode bypass capacitor for the output tube and the 270 ohm 2-watt resistor for the same application. The original had gone up to over 300 ohms, and you know, since that's such a highly stressed part, I went ahead and replaced it, but I found nothing else that made me even want to think about changing anything. Like I've already said, the components used in these were very high quality, and they generally held up. The tracking pressure was about 9.6 grams. I adjusted the spring to get it down to about 6. The optimum pressure for this cartridge is 6 to 8, and since this is mainly going to be used for spoken word recordings, 6 grams will do good.
Bell Lamington by D.E. Stevenson. Copyright 1961 by Dorothy E. Peplow. Recorded in 7 records for the Library of Congress in the studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, 1962. Intended solely for the use of the blind, with the kind permission of the publishers Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston. Read by Dale Carter. This novel tells the story of a country girl who comes to live
Mr. Roberts by Thomas Hagen. Copyright 1946 by Thomas Hagen. Recorded for the Library of Congress in the Talking Book Studios of American Foundation for the Blind, Incorporated, with the kind permission of the publishers Houghton Mifflin, solely for the use of the blind. Read by Robert Reddick. Listeners are requested to keep these talking book discs clean and in order. This book is a novel, the story of a Navy auxiliary ship in the Pacific, which was made into a Broadway hit. Roberts. There were 14 officers on the Reluctant.
Light from the floor lamp, he looked old, but not evil, but merely foolish. He glanced up at the knock of the open door. Yeah. He said gruffly, "What is it?" Ensign Pulver leaned a casual hand on the door jamb. "Captain," he said easily, "I just threw your damn palm trees over the side." The end. Recorded in the Talking Book Studios of American Foundation for the Blind, Incorporated. December 1966. Read by Robert Reddick.